Maybe don't know.
This time, next time, this time to build. 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 This time power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I am your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to episode 185 of the Power Company Podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. I am at home in currently sunny, cold, kind of perfect climbing weather, Lander, Wyoming, and I've been reflecting a lot as we enter this kind of second wave of lockdowns that are happening across the U.S. and other places. And honestly, I'm just feeling really lucky to have a place where I can explore my local boulder fields. I can be outside bouldering a lot, and I may not have done the amount of exploration had I been traveling at the pace I was prior to COVID. So I'm feeling really thankful for this time at home, with my wife, with my friends, able to work on projects, be creative, not have the stress of travel. And I hope that all of you are finding similar reasons to be thankful. Hopefully you have reasons why staying home feels good. All right, before we get started, because today's episode is kind of a long one, though honestly not long enough, I do want to take a second just to remind you that the Crag Kit and the Boulder Bag are out, ready for pre-orders on the website, powercompanyclimbing.com/essential-elements, or you can find it right there in your show notes in your pocket supercomputer. Those will be shipping out prior to Christmas. We hope that we're going to be able to get things to everyone by Christmas, but of course we can't make that promise with potential COVID delays everywhere. So check those out. I'm really excited about this product, to finally have it in the world. So excited. Check those out. All right. Today's episode was kind of a long time coming. I've been talking to today's guest for a while, and frankly, watching his climbing career with great interest. Eric Jerome is a boulderer originally from the East Coast, now living in Salt Lake, and is one of the best, strongest, burliest boulders in the U.S. currently. And I've really loved watching Eric grow over the years. I climbed with Eric years ago in the Southeast, and since then he's rocketed through the grades. He's gotten stronger and stronger and stronger, positioning himself as, maybe one of the physically strongest climbers in the U.S. Close to the world. We talk about it a little bit near the end of this interview. But Eric is also incredibly generous with his time and his knowledge, and is just fucking psyched to boulder and to climb on new boulders. And he's a super, super climbing nerd. And I love that about him. I've known about Eric's list making for years. He makes lists of all the best boulders, extensive lists, and outsources the ideas, and everyone gets to contribute. And, he tries to pare it down as objectively as possible, which frankly is impossible. But he makes a strong effort to do it. And I love it. I love seeing these lists. So we start this conversation pretty much talking about one of Eric's lists, his top 100 double-digit boulders in the U.S., which we do have published on our website on this page's show notes, so you can link directly to that from the show notes in your pocket supercomputer. The list is always changing. In fact, he just sent me a new boulder for the honorable mentions, which, by the way, if we included all the honorable mentions, all the possibles, all the slash grades, all of that. We've got a 200 boulder list. That's the kind of extreme nerdery, is that a word, that Eric loves to dig into. So in this episode, we're talking about what makes a boulder a potential candidate for these lists, the best lists. We're also joined by longtime super climbing nerd and technician Max Zolotukhin. I did not know Max was going to be here for this interview, but I'm glad I put a microphone in front of his face because I knew he was going to have something to say in this, and I'm glad he did. All right, let's get into it.
I definitely have friends who only want to climb 5-star boulders, and therefore they're just not having fun most of the time because there's not that many 5-star boulders. And if you lower your standard, you're going to get stronger, you're going to experience more climbing, so you're going to have a good time.
Power. This time to build. Power. This time to build. Power. This time to build. Power.
We got snowed out this morning in the rock shop pretty quickly, but it's just nice to get out of the city, breathe fresh air.
Yeah, but you got to touch some good blocks while you're out there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
New project, so.
Do you think, I'm just going to ask this question right off the bat, do you think your new project would make your list?
Ooh, no, not quite.
Okay.
Maybe. It's really good. It's really good in a lot of ways, but I don't think it's quite got the right elements.
Editor's note, now that he's done the project, he's changed his mind. I think a lot of us would do that. Okay, let's talk about what first let's talk about what the list is.
Yeah.
You and I started chatting a while ago because you were on Instagram talking about what the best boulders are of certain grades and of all grades. So what are the lists in their current state?
Yeah, so I've pretty much always been obsessed with list making.
Yeah.
Ever since I learned what climbing was and that there were climbs that you could categorize into lists. And really I started making the list because when I would go to fall asleep at night, I couldn't because I just had all these boulder problems fluttering around in my head, all these things I wanted to do and climb and experience, and I couldn't sleep, and it was a real problem. And I found that if I wrote these things down, then it sort of compartmentalized it, and then I could get some peace of mind.
Yeah.
But pretty much whenever I have a little too much time on my hands, like when I started the official top 100 list or whatever, I think it was a back injury. I don't know. I'm injured a lot, but it was some injury where I couldn't climb for a while. And that magnified my longing to experience all these great rock climbs in the world. And I really couldn't sleep for many nights. And so I was like, that's it. I'm writing them all down. And I wanted to engage the community and get a consensus because I wanted to be as objective as possible. And that would sort of serve as like my lifetime tick list. Like if I can do the majority of these boulders, I'll feel complete in life, you know?
Yeah.
So started writing down top 100. I have two lists. I have a single digit and double digit just because it's easier to divide it up. There's so many more single digit boulders than there are double digit boulders.
Yeah.
And it's been good. Yeah.
You said you tried to come to a consensus or get a consensus. Is that even possible?
It's definitely not possible.
Okay.
No, not at all. But you can try.
Everybody seems to have their own opinions on what makes a good boulder.
Yeah, there's a lot of bias involved in it too. You know, like I had people in my DMs who would only recommend like their first ascents or, you know, everyone has a climb that speaks to them on some other level. Like they had a really personal experience with it or whatever. And
do you think personal experience plays into at all whether you should call it a good boulder or not?
I think it plays into your subjective ranking. Like if you have your own personal list, these are the best boulders I've ever done or the boulders I want to do most, then for sure. And that's what my top 100 list originally was that I made when I was like 13. It was just like cool stuff I saw on Instagram that I like knew I had to do.
Yeah, totally.
But when I looked back at that list, you know, 6 months ago or whatever, I realized that my opinions on bouldering had changed a lot after having moved across the country and been climbing internationally and experienced a lot more rock and problems. So it needed some revision. But for an objective list, no, it does not. It cannot play a role.
Yeah, I agree. And it kind of is frustrating when I see, like, there have been websites or guidebook authors who try to take a star consensus to give a quality rating to a sport route or a boulder. And inevitably, there are people who are just like choss wranglers or whatever, and they love climbing whatever piece of choss there is, and they had the greatest experience on it because they were alone in the woods or whatever. And to them, it's a 5-star boulder.
Right.
And in reality, it's a 0-star piece of choss if you look at it more objectively. So I think those lists that are created from consensus are oftentimes totally misleading.
Yeah, they can be. I think that when looking at a guidebook, the guidebooks that I like and respect the most are the ones that acknowledge that a 1-star boulder can be the most fun you'll ever have in your life. It might be your favorite boulder of all time.
Totally.
But they try and keep that objective stance when giving it star rankings.
Yeah. Now that you've started putting together these lists, when you're on a trip, like when you come here to the rock shop, are you only looking for what you think are 4 or 5-star boulders, or do you still climb on the 1-star boulders?
No, my standards are pretty low for what I'll climb on. I'm from Maryland, and we just have horrible choss all over the place. I spent like so many days of my life scrubbing boulders that should never have been touched or climbed, and as a result, I'll climb anything, but I definitely enjoy the good ones more. So
yeah,
I'll usually if I take a trip to a new place, I'll usually just try to do the best of every grade first. Regardless of grade. If there's a bunch of amazing V6s, I'll go do all those first.
Yeah. So what are the criteria? What makes a good boulder a good boulder? Like, what are the objective criteria that you put forth? Yeah.
So
we're gonna call you the expert on what makes a good boulder for right now.
Well, there's a number of factors, and I have them written down, and my friend Max Zolotukhin here made his own blog post about this years ago, and I think we have some pretty similar criteria overall. And it's important to note that while all these are factors in the quality, certain people weigh factors more heavily than others in their view. So for me, the line is like one of the most important things. Like, that is the purest way to climb it. It's not contrived. For me personally, that stands out above some of the other qualities. So a pure line that doesn't have quite as good rock, I would still prefer to a really good stone with a little bit of contrivance in the problem.
And when we're saying line, are we talking like a visual line, a feature, or is it more like it's only these holds and there's no way to escape or come in from another place?
Yeah, I think
a singular line.
I think it's the latter mostly, but the aesthetics definitely come into play, and I think that that's kind of undeniable. While it is somewhat subjective, you can argue back and forth on which boulder is prettier. You can definitely objectively say that, these boulders on the top 100 list are prettier than a lot of the other random boulders.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Are you saying that you weigh the quality of the line over the rock quality?
It's a balance, like if it's absolute garbage rock but a super pure line, that's not necessarily better than the alternative. But for me, line is like the most important thing.
Because when I put down my criteria, I kind of weighted everything equally, the 6 criteria that I thought were contributed to the quality of a boulder problem, and that's how I allocated those criteria to each star.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Did you do the same thing?
So I didn't go for the star ranking, and I didn't try and make it formulaic, but if you're going for it being as objective as possible, I agree that they should all be weighed equally. I'm just saying that everyone's going to have their own implicit bias and things that they like more than other things. So each individual's preference will change.
But doesn't that also kind of get back to how movement is subjective? like then you're weighing things subjectively over the objectivity of like we can all like look at the same boulder problem and see the same thing, right? So then why should we say, oh, the line is, you know, I think the line is more important than the quality of the rock. Like,
Right.
that's where subjectivity would come into play again.
Yeah, and it's not impacting, like when I made this list, my own personal liking the line more than rock quality, for instance, that didn't come into play. That's just like if I were to make my own personal list and I were to rank them, it would be shown there more evidently.
So the objective version weighs it equally.
Yeah, I think you'd have to.
But we all tend toward the subjective.
Yeah, for sure.
Unless
like,
we try really, really hard not to.
It should be clear that like there's no way that you can actually make an objective list like this.
Right.
It's just like my best shot at it.
Sure. Anything, Max?
I'm just curious because Eric and I haven't actually talked about this.
Yeah,
I mean, we've interacted.
I think it's fascinating.
We've interacted about it on Facebook, but so the criteria that I had back in the day, I think this was 11 years ago that I wrote about this, but it was the quality of the line, like he was saying, the rock quality, the height of the problem, whether the problem had an obvious start, the setting in which you were experiencing the problem. So that's like the surroundings, basically, in the area, and then the landing of the problem. So in my system, there were like an ideal of 6 total stars.
Yeah.
But, you know, there wasn't a single boulder problem. I don't think that exists. That's like a 10 out of 10, you know.
Sure.
That would be 6 stars on all those criteria. Yep. But I did think there were differences between like 5-star problems and 4-star problems that you could find that were like, oh, this, you know, this was like 0.8 out of, you know, on all these factors. So, and that would distinguish from like the really good from like the like world class, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yeah.
The rest of your criteria, did they match up with Max's, or are they different?
Yeah, so I have it written down here, and I can sort of, there's a little bit of differences. So for me, some of the things that Max had mentioned are included in the line. So for my criteria, height, aesthetics, location, and then obvious start are all part of the line criteria. And then the other ones are rock quality, landing, and then like uniqueness and movement come into play for subjective lists. So
okay.
Like if there's a really cool, unique hold, that goes a long way for a lot of people.
Sure.
I think it should.
Yeah.
Because that makes, you know, a boulder with a really crazy, cool, unique hold is
hold or move.
Yeah, sure. That's
sure.
like Tequilgasquay in Colorado. That's like the foot first one.
Yeah.
A lot of people in Colorado really spoke highly of that boulder, and I think that it's impossible to negate that. Aside from the movement, you know, the rock quality looks great, but the movement is like the stellar attribute there, and I think that influences people's opinion of the problem. So I think that should carry weight, but maybe not in this list, you know.
Okay. And I think this sort of illustrates why it's so hard to separate an objective versus subjective list, right? Because we all have our built-in biases, and we're going to go into every single boulder with those, no matter what. So it's really tough to break it down into a totally formulaic system. And that's what you were trying to do, right, Max? Make it super formulaic.
I just thought my criteria were like, we can all look at the same thing and be like, okay, we're experiencing this in the same way because our senses are, you know, like we're all seeing the same line. When we're climbing, we might be experiencing it differently because, you know, you and I might not like the same type of movement. So, you know, something that you really like, I might not like at all, and vice versa. Whereas when we're seeing the same thing, like we're objectively experiencing it in the same way. So that's what I was going for. But like I could see subjectivity being used as like a tiebreaker.
Right, definitely.
I think.
Yeah, and to your point, like if you're comparing the movement of a boulder between two different sized people, you know, someone really short might have to grab a heinously sharp crimp that the other person doesn't have to. So therefore that would change things. But I agree that what you can see is the best indicator of objective quality.
So why, on both of your lists, there are things like height. Why is that more objectively better to have a specific height, whatever it is? And do you both agree on the height?
That's a good question because it is subjective in nature. Some people love low balls. Some people love high balls. I myself trend towards high balls, and I think that's reflected in my list a little bit.
What do you think is the ideal height of a boulder?
I would say, like, for me, 18 feet is like perfect. Like, you don't have to fear for your life up there. If you fall, you'll be fine, but it's still a lot of space to climb, and you got to keep your wits about you.
I mean, I think when you come up to a problem objectively, right, and you're like, this problem is either 12 feet tall or it's 24 feet tall, and all else things being equal, like the 24-foot tall problem is much more impressive, right? Whether like experiencing it, yeah, there's like a bunch of subjective things, like you need way more pads to climb on like a super tall problem, and you need a bunch of spotters, like that's not ideal. But when I always used to try to envision like, oh, what's like my ideal boulder problem? Like, what does it look like? Well, it's probably like 60 to 45 degrees overhanging, like 25 feet tall. Maybe the landing goes up with it or something. So it's not super dangerous, but it's still super proud. And then it's just like a singular line of holds, right? With like bullet rock. So that's kind of like what I based all of that off of, with like an obvious start hold.
Yeah.
Speed of life.
Speed of life.
It's pretty close.
I think that was the boulder that kind of inspired me to come up with this list, because that was when my first time walking into Farley, and it's like such a forest,
amazing.
And then you like walk around the corner and you're like, what the fuck is that? Like, does that actually exist in real life? And
that problem's stunning. Yeah. I think that like the rock quality isn't that great, and I think that the landing can in some ways detract on that one. But I agree, for safety purposes, like it's nice to have. But yeah, I think we can all agree that that's like an incredible problem.
Landing is another one of those things. What if, like you guys were climbing on the Ufo Boulder today, what if the landing is completely manufactured?
Personally, that doesn't really bother me.
I don't mind.
I think that it's important to note that sometimes a weird landing can positively influence the subjective fun of a boulder, or its uniqueness factors, such as like
not
slider,
for me, but it can for other people.
Yeah, well, like slider and HP 40, for instance, like you take a slide down this rock that's adjacent to it, and that's, maybe the boulder wouldn't be as famous if it weren't for that. Or we were talking yesterday about this boulder in Little Cottonwood called Night Shift, where kind of the hard part is not dabbing on these rocks that are surrounding you. You're kind of cave crawling, but I thought that added some really unique qualities to the climb that made it more fun. Like having to actually get closer to the rock than you would normally have to is a unique thing that you don't experience on like any other rock climb. So I enjoyed that, but objectively, a flat landing is the best.
Right. Right. That boulder's not going to make your objective list.
Right.
But it will make the subjective list.
Right.
No, it won't even make the subjective list.
No, that one's not that good. That one's not that good.
It could. Maybe
it's fun.
We'll say that.
I enjoyed it.
It has the potential, or that part of it has the potential. I've climbed a lot of fun boulders that had some major dab potential.
Yeah.
But I agree, I wouldn't put them in my top list because of that. And I think a lot of people make that mistake of saying, oh, that's 5 stars because it was so much fun, and they stop paying attention to, did it have an obvious start hold? What's the landing like? What's the, when I walked up to this boulder, was I impressed or not? When it's a boulder like the UFO boulder, we'll use that as an example. And for everyone listening who doesn't know the UFO boulder, I'm going to describe it subjectively, and then you guys tell me if you agree or not.
Okay.
It's when you walk up to it, it is impressive. It's a big overhanging boulder. It's not as tall as you guys might like, but it probably fits exactly where I want it to be because I have old knees and I don't want to fall much further than that. It's got really cool grips, but it's got lines crisscrossing it every which direction, and it's sort of a choose your own adventure type of boulder. And while I love that boulder, I also couldn't in good conscience give it 5 stars because of that choose your own adventure quality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we talked about that exact thing this morning. We had the exact talk. Does Giving Tree belong in the top 100?
Yeah.
Because that boulder in particular had been claimed on the internet a bunch of times as like being the best V10 in the country. I'd heard that a lot.
Right.
And I think Max and I would both strongly disagree with that. But yeah, so subjectively, that stuff is all true. Objectively, the line, that's like the biggest issue. Like the rock's amazing. It's stunning. It's a little bit shorter than I might like, but it's a great height. You climb a long distance because it's so steep.
Mm-hmm.
The landing's flat. There's a pretty obvious place to start, and maybe not the most obvious because there's like a lower version, which also detracts in my mind from it.
Yep.
But which line would be on the list? You know, there's like 7 or 8 variations, and how do you distinguish the best? We were talking about if only one line on that boulder could exist, which one would be the best? Like if the other holds didn't exist, and we decided that Smoking the Tree would be the best because it goes directly up the middle all the way, whereas the Giving Tree bails out right, Land of the Free bails out left, and the low start is kind of inobvious and dumpy and just adds some silly moves in. It's not as obvious of a place to start.
And there's a way to bail out right even earlier.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So because of all those reasons, it's just like it simply can't be on the top 100 list, but it's a freaking amazing boulder. It's so much fun. It's like phenomenal, and everyone should go do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. Those are your thoughts as well, Max?
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, it was funny because I was saying the Giving Tree, which is the one, you know, that the boulder is named after, seems like the most contrived line because it's the one that the harder variations finish in different places, but it's the easiest way to get from point A to point B. Yeah. Whereas with the Giving Tree, there's actually an easier way to get to
end up in the same place.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's kind of ironic. It seems like the most squeezed in of the lines there.
Yeah, I agree completely. And for me, you know, because that's like at my project level, you know, V10, V11 is my top level. For me, it becomes this really cloudy place when I'm climbing on it because I'm like, do I just have to do the same exact beta as the person who did it originally? Because if I do this slight different bit of beta, I'm sort of trending into another one of the variations. So how does that look, you know? And so it's a confusing place to be. In my head, until I had that realization, I'm like, oh, this is one of the best boulders I've ever climbed on. And now I'm like, I don't know so much anymore. You know, I love climbing on it, but is it one of the best I've climbed on?
I think for me, some of my like least favorite climbing or bouldering experiences that I've had have been with lines that have had where you walk up to it and maybe you don't have enough information about how the line was climbed, and then you misinterpret like either how it started or where it finished, like if there were like holds that were on or off, and that kind of like detracts from the line if you're like, oh, I started it. Oh, actually, this person started like much lower in this like super inobvious place and climbed into like the obvious start. And that's always a bummer that, you know, that for me like takes away stars from a problem for sure.
Yeah, that's a really good way to think about it. And it might, you know, help to define the line as you're calling it. And it fits several of your categories, Max, that if you can walk up with no information and know exactly where to start and exactly where to climb.
Yeah, exactly.
That's definitely a better experience than like, I don't know, do I start here? Am I starting one move in? I can't really tell. You know, that's always a weird experience and definitely detracts.
Yeah, I agree. I think the purest way you can climb something is there's one place to start and one place to finish. And, you know, you don't have the option of bailing or starting a little lower to the right. You walk up, you pull on, and you go to the top, and that's it, you know?
Yeah, if that brings up an interesting question. Is there even a place on either of your lists for a drop-off boulder? Can it ever, if all the other boxes are checked, can a drop-off boulder even make the list?
It can't make it because There is one like that in the New River Gorge called Spinal Remains. That's amazing in every way, but it's a drop off, and I didn't put it on there simply because of that.
Yeah, definitely not the top 100.
Yeah,
I mean, there are plenty of good.
Awesome drop offs.
Esperanza is like incredible and like has a great history. But
cool. That's cool. I want one thing.
Waco.
Well, yeah, one thing that I was pretty adamant about in making the list was that history should not play a role in determining the best boulders.
I agree.
Like it doesn't matter that Midnight Lightning was Midnight Lightning. If it's not a good boulder, it's not a good boulder. Yeah. I'm not saying Midnight Lightning's not a good boulder. I'm sure it's great.
Midnight Lightning's like the 8th best V8 in the valley or something. It's not that incredible.
For sure.
Do you ever go out on trips, brought up by Midnight Lightning, do you ever go out and seek out boulders that aren't on the list, but just because you want to do them? Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Like Gill Egg and the Gunks, I was like most excited
to
do that boulder when I went there, and it's kind of a shitty boulder, but I'm psyched I did it. I did Gill Egg, it's Gill Egg.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of people, and I've seen this a number of times, get trapped into this like romanticizing the best boulders. And while I love this kind of a list, I do think there's some danger in these lists for some people who are like, I only want to climb the best things. I have to be really inspired to go out and climb something. And I think that makes it harder for them to keep progressing. Mm-hmm. I think it's tough to have a larger perspective if you only limit yourself to what you've heard is the best. So do you feel like there's a danger in it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I definitely have friends who only want to climb 5-star boulders, and therefore they're just not having fun most of the time because there's not that many 5-star boulders.
Yeah.
And if you lower your standards, I think this is true all around. If you have low standards for boulders, you're going to have a good time. You're going to get stronger. You're going to experience more climbing. You're going to just enjoy yourself more. You're going to be able to go out and climb on bad boulders like we did yesterday in Little Cottonwood. We climbed some first descents in Little that were like maybe 4 feet tall. These caves. And
I do that all the time at the rock shop.
I had a great time.
All the dirt burglars. I'm on the hunt for them all the time.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly. I wish y'all could see this photo because that's exactly the kind of boulder I'm looking for. When I have to lay down and I can barely keep my back from hitting the ground while I'm climbing. I love that shit. And I feel like I get a lot out of it, actually. It makes me appreciate the really amazing boulders even more because I can have fun on this 1-star piece of junk, that may never, ever be climbed again. And then when I do get the chance to climb on one of these really amazing boulders, it makes it all that much more special.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think originally when I made my list, it was a little bit in response to like 8A culture. And part of it was trying to shift the focus away. And like I certainly climb on plenty of boulders that are not that great, like all the time. And I enjoy movement and like solving problems more than anything.
Yeah.
But the part of it that I wanted to like shift focus towards is like quality and not towards difficulty. Cause I was like back in the day, I would just get frustrated seeing people like climb soft problems and like feeling like they had accomplished a lot. I mean, that sounds kind of shitty, but like more like I wish that they had focused on like climbing the best problems in an area rather than, because I would see people like come to an area that I would climb at and like seek out the problems that they knew were easy for the grade.
Right. Sure.
And
I do that as well. Like if I'm trying to break into a new grade, I'm certainly going to seek out the easy ones,
Sure.
But I think I can also distinguish between, am I there searching for difficulty purely, or do I want to go out and climb great boulders? And ideally, I search for the easy ones, and that leads me into being able to do the better ones,
That's fair, yeah.
So is there then a danger with these sort of lists and saying these are the best boulders, these are the ones you should go do, with I mean, lots of people are afraid of this whole overcrowding thing. Does it make it worse for the best boulders if more people are climbing them?
I think it can. I mean, like holds do change.
Were you climbing on Golden Harvest the season that?
Okay, that's a good example. That's a great example.
Okay.
So, wait, what were you gonna say?
Well, there's one hold on Golden Harvest that seems like it's like had POF or something on it, and it's super, super polished, which is strange for Southern sandstone. And I'm just curious what happens when we brush a hold every single time someone touches it. You know, like if you look at all the other holds on the boulder, they rarely get brushed and they're all totally fine and still have the same texture. But I watched several days people climbing on Golden Harvest, and every time someone would fall, they would brush that hold.
Yeah.
And that hold is super polished and has gotten more polished over the years. So
yeah,
just curious, does that change a boulder by directing so many people toward it?
I think it does have an influence. Like, first of all, I think brushing holds is good overall.
Agreed.
You should brush them,
Agreed.
but like there should also be more cleaning of holds with water, like getting the gunk out of there. But that's another issue. But Golden Harvest is a great example because I only ever tried it after it had been super glassed up,
Right.
and that negatively influenced
Yeah.
my opinion of it.
Yeah.
Both objectively and subjectively. Like I just wasn't having fun because it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like people are grabbing a different hold now that's like has texture still,
Yeah, could be. I
rather
don't know.
than one of like the originally used holds. And
I don't think I've been back there since the time I climbed on it with you.
oh yeah, so you know, that boulder's famous because it has like 26.5 stars in the guidebook, which everybody just sort of takes that and is like, yeah, it must be the best boulder ever. It's Golden Harvest, but it's not that amazing, you know? Like the worst part about that boulder for me is you walk up and you have no idea where to start it. Like even looking at the guidebook and like having people tell me, like I still don't really know where to start it.
Right.
I think the problem to the left, Golden Showers, the V5 is really great.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think, you know, you can't really avoid people going and climbing, and, you know, holds will change, texture will change. We can all just like do our best to spread good climbing ethics and understand the principles of cleaning holds and everything, but I'm not going to like discourage people from going to do a good boulder because of a fear of that, you know?
Yeah. Well, now that we've completely disparaged Midnight Lightning and Golden Harvest, what other boulders were heavily suggested that you think definitely do not make the list?
Oh man, there were a bunch. It's hard to remember because it was a while ago now, and I haven't thought about this for a long time now. But big controversial ones are like Roses and Blue Jays and Wet Dream for the same reason, and it's because, you know, they're incredible. They're amazing. They're some of the best problems in the country. But for me, you know, someone who carries line over everything, both problems are contrived. Like there's no left or right about it. They're contrived. And so when I engaged the community, I asked, you know, do these boulders belong on the list? A lot of people said no. A lot of people said yes. It was pretty split. And in the end, I did keep them on the list because they are amazing. They're so good in all the other factors. Like the rock is so good.
Right.
It's so pretty. They're so proud that they deserve to make it, but super contrived. Yeah.
Yeah. You were iffing back and forth.
I mean,
Max?
I think, yeah, those two in particular, the Shield and Wet Dream, are like, I always thought of them as like, on all the other factors, they were so far ahead of most of the other problems that were on my list that the fact that they were contrived, their quality superseded the fact that they were contrived, and they were still like, there wasn't anything that was still like pushing past them, but this was like a few years ago, so there might be things now that are new that have superseded that. But
I agree, and it's like the argument, you know, people were arguing that like it doesn't matter, it doesn't affect it, that you can go right on Wet Dream or that you can go into something from nothing on Roses and Blue Jays. But my argument is that if Wet Dream if the holds weren't there, and if Nocturnal Emissions holds weren't there, well, I personally think Nocturnal Emissions like looks like a more obvious place to start. There's like this big shield feature, but that's besides the point. If there was just one place to start and go up, you can't really argue that it wouldn't be better for it.
Sure.
I'm curious, did you have through all of your research, did you have like one problem that came out that you were like, this seems like all the factors point towards this being, and I'm going to limit this to the
like
U.S.
the best problem?
Yeah, just in the U.S. because that's like mostly where our opinions are coming from.
Yeah. I also have a world's list in the making. It's really daunting and scary to work on that.
Yeah.
We just need you to get injured again so you can work on the list.
Yeah. They're always in progress too. I should note, like, this top 100 list is constantly changing.
Sure.
Like, I haven't been to a lot of these problems, so
Yeah.
when I see a problem, it might go up or down on the list in my mind, and that's why I asked the opinion of so many people. Like, I reached out to Daniel and Paul and Jimmy, like all the pro climbers. I had all these hundreds of pro climbers hitting me up in my DMs telling me what they think is the best boulder, and it's good because they've climbed the most things. Like, they have the best idea. And then I would also hit up people who were regionally like experts. You know, like, I know nothing about. I shouldn't say that, and kind of know a lot about it, but I've never been to North Carolina to climb, but, you know, I hit up all the people who have developed the climbing in North Carolina and asked for their opinions, and tried to get a good grasp of quality across the country. And I worked with Brian Nugent really closely on the list. He's, I don't know if a lot of people out on the internet know him. He doesn't have like a huge internet presence, but he's a legend. He's, you know, famous now for having Flash Spectre, which is like the most fucked up shit anybody's ever done. It's like a V13 in Bishop. That's very high on the list if anybody was wondering. And it takes, you know, pro climbers a long time to do that boulder. It's a freaking hard boulder, and he flashed it, and he's amazing. And he's also a huge climbing nerd, and he's climbed a lot of these boulders, a lot of them, and he's traveled more than I have. So we worked pretty closely on the list together. And when it came to the ranking, I sort of defaulted to him in a lot of instances because he had been to more of them and done more of them. I think right now, as it stands, like the Shining Path in Red Rocks is the top of the list, but I strongly disagree with that. Max also strongly disagrees with that.
Hard disagree.
You know, a lot of people who'd done it said this is the best, like Pablo and just a bunch of people, but I you know, the landing's not that good. It's maybe, you know, too tall for comfort, if that's the objective quality of it, and the rock's just not that good on it. But if we're talking about the best in the country, I haven't been to Sunseeker, but I feel like Sunseeker could definitely be up there. I did Western Gold and Osiris the last time I went to the South, where, you know, now these lists are informing my goals when I make trips. Like, why wouldn't I do the best ones? So I went to the South for a couple weeks and got like 2 days of climbing because it was raining so much, but I was able to do Osiris and Western Gold and this thing called Dragon Ball, which were all tentatively on the list. And they're amazing. Western Gold, I think a lot of people have claimed that to be the best boulder in the country. It's phenomenal. I think that you could go left into this crack system and it would be easier than doing Western Gold. Other than that, it's pretty incredible. I really loved Osiris, but it has the same issue. You can go left and it's easier.
They're better than the Shield.
Yeah, I think so. The Shield, okay. Another element that I started talking to people about, which I think is pretty valuable, is like a bell curve of the difficulty. So some people expressed the opinion that there would be like a perfect bell curve of difficulty that makes a problem the best. Like it's if with the Shield, for instance, it's really easy into like a 1 or 2 move crux and then it's over. And I'd argue that it would be better if it were more consistent, if it were like you had to try and then you try for the crux like right in the middle, like, you know, 3/4 of the way up the boulder, and then it's still kind of on you at the end. And I think Western Gold has the perfect bell curve. Like, it starts off like the first move's chill, it's like a setup move, and then it's pretty hard, maybe like V7, V8, you do the crux, and then you've got like V6, V7 top out that's still on you still have to try. And I think that goes a long way when comparing to something like the Shield.
And does that bell curve work for any grade? Like, could a V6 be the best boulder in the country?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fort Rasta. That's the best V6.
Where's Fort Rasta?
It's on the Northern California coast. It's called, the area is called Fort Ross. It's like an hour and a half north of San Francisco. It's like a singular Joe's Valley style boulder on a flat beach and it's like a perfect like 20-foot line starting on like a jug, and then you do like big moves on like flat holds, and then like yeah,
that one does look amazing. My top V6 is Scudbuster in the new. It's like stunning rail feature. It's one rail that follows up this giant clean face for maybe 25 feet. It's quite tall, and it's got that bell curve. It's really, really excellent, but I haven't done for Rasta. It looks amazing.
The bell curve idea is really interesting. I had not thought of that before. When you were talking about it, I was thinking of Wet Dream, which is basically like every single move is the exact same grade. It's like it's like 18 V7 moves in a row.
Yeah.
Which is also like, I think that's also, I don't know if it's as cool as like the bell curve idea, but you're right. Like for sure that makes Wet Dream better than the Shield in my mind, is the fact that it is like you can do every single move in isolation like without too much difficulty, but then doing like all of them back to back to back to back, it's like it makes it so amazing.
Then the Shield's like not that fun to try because you just climb this V7 and then fall over and over and over again. It is subjective, for sure.
What's interesting actually, that like you mentioned that's more impressive or that's more appealing about Wet Dream, because that's like, if you go to Red River Gorge, if we're talking routes, that's the thing that is the big detractor. Like every move is V3, so then it becomes no fun.
I think it is like a subjective factor. It's personal. Some people love like one move crux boulders, but I think like the vast majority of people would probably agree with the bell curve thing. I think that is more fun to climb on.
I do think it's super interesting idea.
Dragon Ball was the same. It like looks so stunning, and my friend Alex Brown put it up, but like nobody had gone to repeat it pretty much. And I was like, well, I got to go do it. And you hike like really far, and it kind of sucks. And then you get there and it's stunning, but it's like V3 into a 1 or 2 move V11. And so while the V3 is really amazing and fun, I don't think it's quite as cool as Osiris, where it's like first move's pretty easy. You try hard for a few moves, you do the crux, and then you're like met with a techie hard mantle at the top.
Right.
That is full value the whole way. Like the V3 at the bottom of Dragon Ball, I would do it differently every time because it didn't matter. Like they were jugs. I could put my feet wherever. It didn't require my focus in the same way.
Yeah.
And so therefore I wasn't as present. I wasn't enjoying it quite as much, I think, as Osiris.
Now, is there, when we're trying to look at this objectively, is there a level of climber that we're comparing it to? Like for instance, Wet Dream being V7 moves over and over, Jimmy's not going to be challenged by V7 moves over and over. Daniel's not going to be that challenged by V7 moves over and over. I'm going to be extremely challenged by V7 moves over and over. So are we considering like 1 grade above, 2 grades above? What's the category we're looking at there?
I think part of the problem with the whole top 100 list is, I don't know, when I was putting it together a while ago, I was noticing that it leaned heavily towards the more difficult problems, like the double-digit problems. And I think that's largely a byproduct of the fact that some of the criteria, that being like the line and the height, like those things, when you have a problem like speed of life, that's literally like, you know, a full pad edge, and then there's like no holds for 5 feet, and then you have like another full pad edge, and then that to the top. Like it's much harder to find a boulder problem that's like moderate or easy.
Right.
That is like a singular feature, and then, you know, no holds, and then another singular feature, which kind of makes for the best lines. Mm-hmm. So just by that virtue, I feel like the better problems tend to be harder. So that's kind of, I don't know if that detracts from the objectivity, but I feel that's just kind of how like things break down, and that should inspire people, I think.
Yep, I think so. I agree. I mean, that's one of the things that when I talk to my clients, it's often, oh, I went to this crag or I went to this boulder field and I saw this thing and it looked amazing. You know, why do all the hardest things look the coolest? Mm-hmm. And they're excited to try these harder things or get to the level where they can try these harder things because they look cooler. And I think that it's almost this linear scale where it's like V5 looks cooler than V2 and V8 looks cooler than V5 and V12 looks cooler than V8, Not every boulder, but the best ones do, I think, a lot of the times.
Sure. Yeah, I think generally speaking, I'd agree with you.
We also haven't really talked about top outs, and you just talked about a technical mantle. And, having been a Southern climber for a lot of my life, there are some top outs on some really great boulders that end up, for even the best climbers, just becoming these beached whale moments. Does that detract?
Not in an objective sense.
Okay.
Subjectively, I will say that I love juggy top outs and hate beach whale top outs.
Subjectively, I disagree. I love mantles.
Now there was, I don't know if Eric, if you're old enough or had, was paying enough attention at this point. Mm-hmm. Max, you might remember quite a while ago on Jamie Emerson's B3 bouldering blog. Mm-hmm. I think it was on there. There was a conversation about using your knees on a top out does not count. Just doesn't, it's not a thing. You can't count a boulder if you touched your knee to the top out. What if that happens, and does that, how do you feel about that? And should it, like, if you have to use a knee, if that's the easiest way to do a top out, does that make the boulder less cool?
I love that deep cut, first of all, and there were a lot of things said on Jamie's blog that, looking back now, seem pretty ridiculous. But no, I don't think the climbing, the style of how you climb something does not impact the quality of it, for sure. And people definitely have different ethics, like the British, like they're like, oh, don't use a knee pad, or I know plenty of people who are kind of like against, but I think we've kind of moved past that now. And
yeah, I think most people are in consensus on knee bars at this point.
Yeah, I think so. Can I completely switch topics here?
Sure.
Because of this knee pad conversation, and you two are deep thinkers in the bouldering world, so I'm curious where your stance lies on this.
On knee bars.
Not on just knee bars, but on the idea that a lot of old classic, like let's take Waco, for example. I've mentioned this enough on the podcast that people have heard it, but I spent a few seasons in Waco where a lot of people were saying, you should go do this V12. It's way easier now with this knee bar. And
the
I'm
butter
like,
pumper.
I'm like, exactly. That's one of them. I'm like, do you hear what you're saying? You just said it's easier. V12 is an expression of its difficulty. So if it's easier, it's no longer V12. How do you feel about we'll call it a technological advance of like Send climbing pads and how they've made a lot of boulders easier? Is that a good thing, a bad thing, or just a thing?
So I think it's good for the future of the sport, like by any means necessary is kind of how I would approach it. And if the boulder's easier, it's easier. Like the easiest grade is the grade that it is, I think. And it can get a little cloudy. Like if someone who's taller than literally everyone else can reach past it, then does it change the grade for everyone else? But I think in large, a knee bar that downgrades the boulder should downgrade it. And then if you want, to personally challenge yourself to do, the butter pumper without the knee bar and make it feel like V12, that's on you, but you can't take 12 points for it.
Oh, you can't take the points.
I don't think so. I mean, you can tell yourself,
even if you put in your AA comment that you did it that way.
It is V12 that way, but I think the easiest grade is what it is. And I've opted to not use knee bars plenty of times because I've gotten more into them over time. But like, there's a boulder in Little that like got kind of controversial called Spinal Twist, where I got hated on a bit and was like kind of trolled for
Eric insisted on climbing his first V13 the hard way.
Yeah.
Without the knee bar that everyone uses now that wasn't originally used.
Yeah, so it's this like Chris Sharma boulder in Little Cottonwood. It's kind of cool, but this old
So did you
school-
take the grade?
So people take V13 with or without the knee bar.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that
Trying to set the record straight here.
I think I didn't really try it with the knee bar. I think it's probably harder without it because like the first move without the knee bar is like a single move. I'd call it like single move V11 maybe. And it took me like a whole session to do that move. And if you plug the knee, you just kind of reach that hold. And then depending on your Shindex, and there's a lot of different ways of doing it now, but you have to do a really technical footwalk that like kind of sucks and your feet pick and it tears your shoe up. And so for me, the reason I opted to not use the knee bar was a number of factors. One, the guy who showed it to me is a friend, Graham, who'd done it many, many years ago. He's like a local legend. And he didn't do the knee bar, and he was like, really excited to show me, and he's like, this is the beta and this is how you do it, and I was like, all right. And I didn't own a knee bar pad at the time. I just like had come from Maryland where climbing was less of a scene and like didn't know that much about knee barring even, and I thought the move was badass. It's like this dope bicep lunge to a cool pinch. It's really hard. It was originally done without the knee bar. And because it was the first of a grade for me, I wanted like no question in my mind that I was climbing a V13,
Right.
Like I didn't want to feel like, oh, I knee barred, maybe it's V12, And it was freaking cool that way. And the alternative was the knee bar, where the crux then becomes like a technical footwalk that everyone seems to hate. And I didn't want to do that. I'd rather do it a harder way that's more fun. But if with the knee bar it were V12, what I climbed would be V12. Spinal twist is V12,
Sure.
I'm going to go on record and say that knee bars are the future, and I think more people will be using more and more knee bars. I like the older I'm in my mid 30s now, and I feel like 10 years ago I like would knee bar like, I don't know, once every 2 or 3 months or something, and I feel like now I wear at least one knee pad on like over 50% of like what I'm climbing on, and it just like feels like the way my body moves now is really natural to seek that kind of tension and just take weight off. I don't know. My local project that I have in Salt Lake, I wear 3 knee pads on. So
can we just explain how that works for a second?
2 of the knee pads are stacked on top of one another to create like
an extra little bit of depth.
Another 1/4 inch of
add to
thickness.
your Shindex.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not quite there yet. I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that knee barring is the future, and I'm trying to get better at it because it is a skill. And I realized that part of the reason I didn't like it before was because I was bad at it. I'd really enjoy the knee bars that were just like you didn't even have to think about it. It's like your whole knee fits in there. But there's a lot of boulders with really techie, hard knee bars, and it is a skill. And I think that's a really fun element of climbing is like finding these new little technical challenges. So I'm trying to challenge myself to get better at it, but I definitely don't jump at the opportunity. I rarely use my knee pad as it is.
Yeah, knee pads and like the new knee bar ideas sort of fucked me up because I took the approach of I'm always just taking guidebook grades no matter what they are because it's such a cloudy, weird thing to navigate. But then like my second season in Waco, I climbed several boulders that I was like, I can't even feel good about taking these guidebook grades because they're so different with the knee bar versus how Fred did it originally or whatever, so I think it's a tricky thing.
That's not your fault. That's Fred's fault.
Fred, you should have been thinking forward. So knee bars for some people take away from the quality of a boulder. You two don't see it that way.
No, I don't think you can. Again, like that's subjective. Like Griffin is like the best boulder in the world, doesn't use knee bars. He refuses to, even if it makes the problem much, much harder. Like, for instance, he repeated Creature of the Black Lagoon, which is a V16 in Rocky Mountain National Park, without any knee bars, whereas Daniel and Jimmy and all these other ascensionists put in a knee bar, rested for a really long time, like kept going, put in another knee bar. And it doesn't change the quality. It also doesn't change the grade. Like even though maybe Griff's way of doing it is like V17, then it's still V16 though.
Yeah.
But I think it is important to acknowledge the style with which someone climbs something. If they choose not to use the knee bar, I think it's valid for you to be like, yeah, they didn't use the knee bar. I was fucked up.
Sorry. I don't know if this is totally off topic, but something maybe we've talked about before. But do you feel like climbers have different styles like they used to? I feel like when I started climbing, they're different, like pro level climbers or elite climbers had very distinct climbing styles.
Yep.
And I feel like I don't notice that so much anymore. I feel like everyone's kind of, maybe because gyms have advanced.
Homogenous.
Yeah. But when we were growing up, like there were people that I looked up to. Will's Young, I remember like really looking up to because he was like so light on his
really
feet.
Flowy style.
Yeah, exactly. Or climbing with Ty Landman, like back in the mid 2000s, like was also like super unique with just like everything was wide, like everything was like jumping and just like, but I feel like now when I watch elite climbers, everyone kind of climbs the same, and maybe that's climbing gyms. I don't know if that's like off topic, but that's something
That's
I
a good
found
question.
interesting.
I hadn't really thought about it, but the first thing that comes to mind is that now I think as climbing's advanced, people are seeing that the way forward is to be well-rounded.
Yeah.
And so,
filled in the gaps in the
there's
movement.
a huge emphasis on acknowledging your weaknesses and working on them. Whereas in the past, it was like if you could get by climbing V10, you were a pro climber, and OB carry-on could jump between all the holds and scream and get by, and that was good enough. But now it's not really good enough. You gotta be fucking good. And so we're all working on our weaknesses and trying to be as well-rounded as possible. And I think that can account for that in large part.
Yeah, I bet that's where my mind went as well, is that people are spending a lot of time really filling in the gaps, and we get to see all the other styles so much more readily. And after we were able to see it all, people started mimicking those things, and realizing, oh, I could get better if I were able to do that, and if I were able to do this. And I remember an article years ago about Joe, Dave, and Luke. And in the article, they talked about when we're in the gym, we'll do a boulder the way we would do it, but then we'll also do it the way Chris would do it, or the way Francois would do it, or,
Totally.
And they would try to imitate these styles. And I think that's just evolved into having a more complete movement package. And maybe we're approaching like people having the complete movement package. I don't have a clue what that might look like or who it might be.
Adam Andrew.
Adam, yeah, good point. And so maybe we're hitting that like zenith of movement, or maybe there's something new waiting in the wings that we haven't seen yet at all.
Yeah, I think we're approaching it, I'd say. Sure. It's kind of cool. It's also kind of, I don't know, I personally like seeing the variation in styles between climbers. Like that was really cool to me.
I do too.
But,
a lot of the climbers that stand out to me are like Fred has an obvious style that he climbs in, I remember watching Ron Kaut climb the first times I saw him climb and thinking that he was super unique, So that stands out. And I hadn't really thought of it until you just brought it up, that it's sort of homogenized.
I think there are still styles though, for sure. Like I love thuggy compression boulders on big holds, and Max is like a technical expert. And when we've been climbing on the Woody together recently, it's like pretty clear that we favor different types of moves and styles, and we approach the same move differently. And that's the same with everyone else I've been sessioning with on the Woody lately. Like we all approach the problems differently, and the problems we set reflect our styles.
I think what you said about like emphasizing strengths is totally right, because that's like exactly what people used to do. Is like they would figure out what they were good at, and then they would just like push that, and like try to excel at that one style. And now, especially like the elite climbers, like if you're trying to climb in competitions, like that's no longer an option, right? Because you have to do like every single type of boulder, like as you get on the wall, and it kind of like eliminates that part of like, oh, when I started climbing, like I was really good at crimping, but now I have to, paddle dyno. So
Yep.
Yeah, and I think it's cooler to be well-rounded. Like I personally have huge discrepancies. I'm really strong in compression, and I'm pretty weak on crimps and stuff you have to wrap your thumb on. And so, while I could just go out and only try like V14 and V15 compression boulders and like probably do some of them, I think it's cooler that I go to Joe's Valley and get shit on by like crimpy V11 frequently, because for me, climbing is like a pursuit of mastery, and I want to feel as though I can climb any boulder of any grade if I'm inspired by it. And so, recently I have been trying to like push it within my style a little bit. It's hard in Utah because there's like no compression boulders, but I'll fly to France and do the Big Island or something one day maybe.
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm a big advocate of mastery and shoring up those weaknesses, and my strengths and weaknesses are the same as yours, just down several notches. And I feel like I want to get better at full crimping, but I'm 45. I turned 46 this year. My time to climb my hardest boulders is limited. So I'm like, when I go outside, I'm mostly looking for the compression boulders because I want to climb harder boulders, and feel like I'm running out of time, and I'm spending my time in the gym on a lot of crimp boulders.
Yeah.
So it's super interesting to see how you're approaching it, where you're at, versus me feeling like I'm nearing the end of my line here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it all depends on your goals. Like for me, the biggest goal when I started climbing, it was like V15, because that was kind of the hardest thing in like 2012 when I started. It's like Joya was like the one V16.
Right.
That thing sucks, but that was like V15. Like, I never ever thought it would be possible. And now that I've climbed a couple like squeezy V14s, I'm like, oh, okay, I can like definitely climb harder than this within my style. But it's kind of less appealing of a challenge now to me, because it feels like somewhat attainable. And I don't know, the top 100 list is just like a more complete package of what I want to get out of climbing. Like I want to see all those beautiful places, I want to see all those problems, I want to experience all of them. And so for me, it's better for me to focus on being well-rounded so that I can climb, most of those boulders on the list are like V13 and below. So it's like if I can climb V13 in every style, then in theory I should be able to do most of the boulders on that list, and then I can die happy or whatever.
Yeah, totally. You're putting a lot of your life's happiness on these boulders.
Yeah, no.
I like the commitment.
It's kind of fucked up. I don't really like anything other than rock climbing. I'm all in.
So one more question while I've got you both here, since you're both super climbing nerds and think a lot about this stuff. We've talked a little bit about how Max brought up this homogenization of styles, which I think is super interesting. And I'm curious whether you think that did the access to beta videos on almost everything anymore contribute to that? And B, in the grand scheme of things, are beta videos a good thing or a bad thing?
Okay. Well, I think beta videos are a good thing because it's just going to push everyone up. If you have to spend 2 less sessions on a boulder to figure it out, then you can climb harder. And I found personally that I went through periods of time where I really heavily rely on beta videos. I really like the flashing challenge, the challenge of flashing boulders. So like there was a period of time where I'd study the video so intently and then give my flash burn. And I was a little worried for a while that was worsening my ability to read a boulder problem naturally.
Right.
But then, I've been doing more development recently, and I've been challenging myself to not look at videos ahead of time. And I found that my skill to read is still there. It hasn't really gotten worse, I don't think. And maybe it would have had I been watching beta videos that intently from the get-go and never had experienced that challenge of figuring it out on my own.
Sure.
But I think for the most part, it's like good to have it. You can also cater your beta videos to your style. Like I choose to watch when I go to Colorado, there's like 2 guys, Jeremy Fullerton and Nick Chavez, and like they have very similar appearing body types to me, and I always just watch their beta videos and do exactly what they do, and I do the boulders faster. So
right.
Personally, I think it can be limiting, at least for like what I feel like I excel at is being able to read the boulders and like find the beta better than most people, because I've route set for a really long time. And like, that's what I did in my job every day, was like try to figure out the easiest way to do something. So at least for me, like I've noticed people have like preconceived notions of problems and how to do them. And I've had, at least personally, I've had multiple experiences where I've seen over and over, there was like the one way to do the problem. And then I come up to the problem and I'm like, oh, there's this like other way that maybe isn't super obvious, but to me, like I'm like trained in trying to find those easier ways, and I find it pretty quickly. And then the problem's just easier. And I'm always like, man, it's really weird. Like people just get in this kind of like same mindset of I have to do it this one way that it's been done before, where there could be, and often it's a knee bar, but not always, like there's other ways. So I there's definitely like value in that, but I don't know. I think
that's a really good point. I've definitely fallen into the trap of being like, oh, well, this is how everyone's done it, so this is how I'm going to do it. And I try it like that for a long, long time, only to then challenge myself to do it in a way that, would suit me better. That had I not had the beta video, I probably would have just done it that way to begin with, like a high heel hook instead of the toe hook or whatever. And so it can be easy to fall in that trap, and that is limiting. I'd agree.
And I would also say to keep an open mind. I often climb with my girlfriend, and she has like a very different size body than me. She's like 5'1", and I've been climbing 3 times longer than her, but she's definitely had times where she was like, you should try this. And I'm like, I kind of brush it off at first, being like, well, like I think I know better because, I know what my body is like, but like there have been like quite a few times where something seemed ridiculous, and then I tried it and I was like, oh, actually like that like works, and like just keeping an open mind to people who have suggestions, even if they may seem like they don't, like it might not fit your box, or it might seem ridiculous at first. Just that exploration of the movement is like really exciting, and you shouldn't be limited by like the things you've seen before.
Yep, absolutely. And one of my favorite things to do, my wife projects around like the V6 level, and those are the things that I'm really comfortable on. So while I'm spending time near her project, I'll come up with other beta or creative solutions, and I challenge myself to find out how many different solutions I can come up with to this boulder, And just recently I've realized, shit, if I apply that same mindset to harder boulders, all of a sudden it opens up these options I hadn't thought about, because I'm like, I want to do this V11, so I'm going to watch these videos, and this is how you do it. And if I stop thinking out of the box, I'm just limiting myself. So I think you're both right. I think they're a super positive thing, and they can be a super negative thing as well. And maybe they are a contributor to this homogenous style that we're seeing, because so many people just look at the videos and say, here's how I'm going to do it. And everybody's wildly strong these days. So they can just do the beta, they don't have to find a way to fit it.
Yeah. Well, they're going to get old one day.
They are. That's factual. Yeah. I can attest to that. So before we wrap this up, because I've got you here, Max, can we talk about the formula?
Oh, yeah, we can, sure.
Because I think the formula is fascinating. When I first read it on your blog a long time ago, I was like, no, that doesn't work. And I wasn't a boulderer at all. But now that I'm more into bouldering, and I'm trying to like avoid the old folks retirement endurance home by bouldering harder in my mid 40s, I'm spending more time around people who are well versed in bouldering, and I've heard your formula broken out at the boulders multiple times. And I'm like, is that a thing? And every single time it works. So
only within the limits of objectivity of climbing grading, right? Which is to say it's subjective.
Right. Yeah.
So, but within the limits of like the average body type and what have you. It was basically, I just always felt intuitively that, you could break down a boulder problem into its different parts, and that the different parts of the boulder, like down to a single move, each move on the boulder problem has its own grade, right? We all know that, there can be like a V6 dyno, and that's like one V6 move, obviously, right? But if you link 2 V6 moves in a row, it's actually not V6 anymore, right? Because now you're stacking difficulty. It actually turns out to be V8, which seems counterintuitive, but that's actually the case. So yeah, I think back in 2009, I had broken my leg, and I was just like laying around all day. And I think I was I was probably close to your age, maybe a little older at the time, but also like thinking a lot about climbing. And I came up with this equation that was basically, if you combine two contingent parts of the boulder, and it would be the grade X plus Y, and then you divide that by 2, and then you add 2, and then you get the full grade. So the easiest examples are basically like V9 plus V9 is V11, if that makes sense. V9 plus V7 is V10. Right.
Now, did you like reverse engineer this formula? Did you look at a V11 and say, okay, it has these 2 V9 parts. How do I take those 2 V9 parts and arrive at V11? How did you come up with this formula?
Kind of, yeah, because, well, it's very rare to be like, I'm trying a V11 and it's like V0 and then there's one V11 move, right? Usually you're stacking moves
Unless
that are
it's the shield.
less... Yes. you're stacking moves that are less difficult than the grade of the boulder problem, right? So at some point, those numbers add up to something, right? But yeah, and it kind of breaks down, like I found that if you have parts that are more than 4 grades apart, like if you're trying something 4 grades easier, then it doesn't really add up to like a certain length of route. At some point you're just climbing like a route. If you're climbing like 30 moves in a row, it's not really, it's hard to relate that to a boulder problem grade.
Wheel of anything.
Yeah, wheel of anything, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, within 4 grades, so let's say if you climb V5 into V9, if you climb like a 12 move V5, it's still going to be V9 when you get to like the V9 section. But if you climb V7 to get to V9, then it adds up to V10.
Gotcha. That's tricky.
It gets a little tricky there because like there's pump factor. Like a 12 move V5 is a lot of moves, and like I think that can then influence it. But by and large, the rule works. Like if the formula works, you guys should at home think about your project or whatever, and
should put some numbers down on paper.
And usually works, which is really freaking cool.
And a little bit annoying that it can come down to a formula like that. But I think it's super interesting. Did it come from like it seemed like to me, being outside of the bouldering scene at that time, it seemed like it came around the same time as like the sit start craze, where everybody was trying to sit start everything. Did it coincide with that in your mind at all? Like, how do I come up with the grade of how the sit start affects the stand start?
I don't think it had to do with that. I mean, I was probably just obsessed with grades in general and just like breaking things down and trying to get better and like understanding. I've personally always been better at longer boulder problems because I'm like an all-around climber, not like one focus style. So if I can do the longer boulders with, the easier moves and then also like trick my way through them, then I could like conceivably climb harder. Whereas like the boulders I came down to like one really hard move, like I've always like not been able to do that well on. So I think it was kind of selfishly trying to understand like which boulders I would excel at. If I can understand, I can, 4 V7s back to back to back, like I can do that. Oh, that's V11 actually, So when you break it down that way, it's less intimidating if you're projecting something that's like at your limit.
Totally. When you're adding up 4 boulders like that, 4 separate V7 sections, does the formula work the same way?
Yeah, exactly. Because 2 V7s, when you add those up, that's V9, and then 2 sections of V9, that's V11. So
gotcha.
Yeah.
It sounds so simple. Well,
pretty ingenious.
I appreciate you guys sitting down, and frankly, I'm glad you got rained out today or snowed out today.
Hailed out 2 days in a row now.
I know you're not stoked on that, but I am. So, and like I said before, Eric, I appreciate that you're jumping in because you're somebody that a lot of the newer boulders are paying attention to. I think you've gone from, you've rocketed up in the grades, and you might be the single strongest pound for pound person I know. Is that true?
Especially right now. Definitely right now.
Yeah, I'm fat guy power.
You and Yves Gravel.
He's like stronger than me and also so much lighter than me. Like his overall strength beats mine.
Yeah.
And yet he's like 30 or 40 pounds lighter than me or something.
Yeah, I sat down with him in Ottawa and did a conversation after he showed me some of his strength feats, and it was kind of ridiculously impressive.
Yeah. I held the lattice world record or whatever for total weight hung on their edge for 5 seconds for maybe 10 minutes. They posted about it and they were like, here's our record, who can beat it? And I was like, wait a minute, I was training on that edge this summer and I was adding 15 pounds to my body weight for 5 seconds, and I hit them up and I was like, this is my number, and they're like, oh my god, congratulations, we have a new victor. And then not 10 minutes later, they're like, never mind, Yves hit us up. He's stronger than you.
Yeah. Well, I think, people who are really paying attention to bouldering, who frankly are mostly very white and very privileged, are paying attention to what you're doing. So I think it makes a difference that you're speaking out, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate you both sitting down, taking the time out to get super nerdy. And I doubt I'll ever have this opportunity to sit down with the two nerdiest minds of bouldering that I know, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us. That was really fun. And I think it's super important to acknowledge that none of this matters at all.
Yeah.
It's so stupid. And
stupid.
I don't know. I feel like, for anybody out there following the movement in our country right now, I could say a lot, but just, educate yourselves, humble yourselves, use this opportunity to grow as people and make a better world. So,
yeah. And if you're listening and you want to get involved somehow, we've put a list of resources on our website for educating yourself and for donating and for petitions to sign and all the things you can do sitting right there at your computer at powercompanyclimbing.com/uprising-resources, and there'll also be a link right there in your show notes. So go and do that. All right. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.
Just for a little bit of context concerning those last comments, I sat down with Max and Eric shortly after George Floyd was murdered, and we were in the midst of the beginnings of this uprising and the protests, and Eric was a loud voice in the Salt Lake climbing community, and I appreciate that he jumped in the way that he did, and was taking fire from a lot of the white super privileged climbers out there who just don't get it, who haven't taken the time, frankly, to examine their own privileges. And Eric has his priorities in order, and I appreciate the fact that he was and still is speaking out for what's right. I also appreciate Eric and Max sitting down so much and having this nerdy conversation. There's so many parts of this we didn't get around to, and there has to be a part 2 at some time. I would love to just sit down with Max sometime and talk to him, so I hope he makes it back to the Rock Shop as well, or is traveling through, or I can drag him out to Oz or some of our amazing boulders out here. Or I'll travel down to Salt Lake when it's safe to do so, and I'll talk to these guys again. You should go check out Eric's top 100 list. It's the top 100 double-digit boulders in the U.S. Like I said, it's constantly being changed, rearranged. Nearly every one of the top 100 boulders has a video linked. So you'll be able to see all of those videos right there at the link in your show notes, in your Pocket Supercomputer, or at powercompanyclimbing.com. While you're there, check out the Crag Kit and the boulder bag. Those will be shipping out very soon. So excited that those things will be out in the world. Finally, so many years of working on these. You all know where to find us. You can find us on the Facebook, the Instagram, at Power Company Climbing. You should definitely, absolutely, 100% share this top 100 list from Eric Jerome on your Twitters out there. Tweet about it, Twitter about it, whatever it is. I'm not going to see it, though, because we don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
This time, 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 this time.